Some betrayals change people forever. Not because they expected pain from strangers, but because pain arrived from the people who once felt safest. Family, blood. The people who shared childhood memories, laughter, meals, dreams. Because perhaps no wound cuts deeper than betrayal from those who once knew your name before the world did. Especially when betrayal begins with jealousy. And jealousy. Jealousy grows quietly, slowly, patiently, like fire hidden beneath ordinary life. Until one day, everything changes. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture does betrayal feel more painfully human than in the story of Joseph. Joseph. History remembers him triumphantly. The dreamer, the survivor, the ruler of Egypt, the man who saved nations, the brother who forgave. But perhaps history moves too quickly past the pain. Because before greatness, there was abandonment. Before forgiveness, there was betrayal. Before purpose, there was loneliness. And before Joseph became powerful, he was simply a boy. A boy loved differently. A boy misunderstood. A boy carrying dreams nobody around him fully understood. And perhaps that difference made him dangerous. Or perhaps it made him vulnerable. Imagine being 17, still young enough to believe family means safety, still young enough to trust home, still young enough to believe brothers may tease, but would never truly hurt you. Now imagine discovering how wrong you were. Because one ordinary day, a father asks a son to check on his brothers. Simple request, normal day, ordinary family responsibility. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. Joseph leaves home, walking toward familiar faces, toward blood, toward belonging, toward people he trusts. Pause there, because perhaps this detail matters most. Joseph had no reason to fear. The deepest betrayals rarely announce themselves. People do not prepare emotionally for pain from loved ones, especially family, especially siblings. Meanwhile, something darker waits ahead. Because while Joseph walks innocently toward reunion, his brothers watch from distance. And instead of joy, something colder rises. Jealousy, resentment, anger. Years of comparison, quietly boiling underneath ordinary life. Imagine the moment, the brothers seeing him approach, the coat, the dreams, the father's obvious favoritism. Everything Joseph represented. And suddenly, someone says something terrifying. Here comes the dreamer. Pause there. Few sentences feel more dangerous. Because mockery often hides resentment. And resentment left untreated becomes cruelty. The dreamer, not brother, not son, not family. The dreamer, identity reduced, humanity reduced. People becoming symbols of pain. Psychologists understand something deeply unsettling. Humans hurt others more easily once they stop seeing them fully as human. The sibling becomes competition. The partner becomes enemy. The co-worker becomes threat. The person becomes problem. Could Joseph's brothers quietly stop seeing him as brother? Perhaps. Because comparison wounds people, especially inside families, especially when love feels uneven, and perhaps somewhere in their minds. Joseph represented something unbearable. Father's favorite, the chosen one, the son receiving what others quietly longed for. How many families understand this pain? The sibling favored, the child celebrated differently, the quiet competition nobody openly names. Because favoritism rarely disappears quietly. It grows into resentment, into insecurity, into rage. And one day, rage finally speaks. The brothers decide something horrifying. Kill him. Pause there. Can you imagine? Not strangers. Brothers. Blood. Shared childhood. Shared memories. People once laughing together. now discussing murder. How does family become this broken? Psychologists might answer painfully simply. Unhealed jealousy, unspoken resentment, comparison left unresolved, pain ignored too long. Because ignored pain rarely disappears. It mutates. Still, the story changes. One brother hesitates. Life spared. Instead, a pit. Joseph thrown into emptiness, darkness, isolation, confusion. Pause there again. Imagine the emotional terror. No explanation, no warning, no understanding. Only darkness. The people you trusted suddenly becoming threat. Many trauma survivors understand this feeling intimately. The moment reality breaks, the moment safety disappears, the moment innocence dies. Perhaps Joseph cried. Perhaps he begged. The scriptures remain painfully quiet, but human imagination fills silence easily. Why are you doing this? What happened? Please. No answers. Only betrayal. And then, something even worse. A caravan appears. Opportunity, not rescue. Profit. The brothers decide. Sell him. Pause there. Sell him. Like object. Like property. Like burden. Can you imagine the emotional devastation? The realization, they are not only hurting me, they are choosing life without me. Many people know this, pain too. The family rejection, the abandonment, the betrayal by people expected to stay, and perhaps here lies Joseph's deepest human fear. If my own family could do this, who is safe? Because trauma changes trust, especially betrayal trauma. Psychologists understand something devastating. Pain from loved ones reshapes nervous systems deeply. Hypervigilance, fear, difficulty trusting, the belief. Love disappears suddenly. People betray. Safety cannot be trusted. Yet somehow, Joseph survives. Not because pain disappears, not because betrayal becomes easier, but because destruction fails. The brothers remove him, sell him, strip dignity, strip safety, strip home. Yet something remains untouched, something invisible. Hope, perhaps. Purpose, perhaps. Maybe simply survival itself. And perhaps that is why Joseph's story still matters. Because many people secretly ask same question. What happens after betrayal? After abandonment? After rejection? After life becomes unrecognizable? Can pain destroy identity completely? Or can something deeper survive? Because perhaps the greatest mystery of Joseph was never how he rose to power. Perhaps the mystery begins much earlier. Inside darkness. Inside betrayal. Inside loneliness. Inside the terrifying question every wounded person eventually asks, why did this happen to me? Tonight, we uncover one of Scripture's most emotionally devastating journeys, the dreamer, the betrayed son, the forgotten slave, the survivor, or perhaps a wounded boy trying desperately not to let pain define him. This is the story of Joseph, the boy whose own brothers sold him, but somehow could not destroy him. And before this story ends, you may begin wondering whether suffering ruins people, secretly reveals what survives inside them when everything else is taken away. Some wounds begin with hatred, others begin with neglect, but perhaps the most confusing wounds begin with love, especially unequal love, especially love that feels visible, public, obvious, the kind of love everyone in the room quietly notices. Yet nobody openly discusses, because children do not simply need love. They need secure love, fair love, safe love. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture does family tension feel more painfully human than in the childhood of Joseph. Because before betrayal, there was favoritism. Before the pit, there was comparison. Before abandonment, there was love, given too differently. And perhaps that difference changed everything. To understand Joseph, we must first understand Jacob. Yes, Jacob, because family pain rarely begins in one generation. It travels quietly, from parent to child. Fear becoming parenting, wounds becoming patterns. And Jacob knew favoritism intimately. He grew up inside it. Father loved Esau, mother loved Jacob. Division shaped childhood. Competition shaped belonging. The younger brother quietly learning. Love feels uneven here. Pause there, because perhaps this matters more than people realize. Children often parent unconsciously from what shaped them. The child wounded by emotional neglect becomes overprotective parent. The child growing up unseen overcompensates. The child hurt by favoritism unknowingly repeats favoritism. Not intentionally, automatically. Psychologists call this intergenerational transmission. Unresolved emotional patterns moving quietly through families. Could Jacob unknowingly recreate the very pain that shaped him? Perhaps. And perhaps nowhere becomes clearer than with Joseph. Joseph enters life differently. The son of Rachel. Pause there, because Rachel mattered enormously to Jacob. Loved deeply. Desired deeply. The woman he waited years for. The woman representing longing, dream, hope. And Joseph. Joseph becomes child, born from beloved relationship. Not just son. Symbol. Meaning. Fulfillment. Many parents understand this dynamic. The miracle child. The long-awaited child. The child arriving after suffering. Love feels different. Deeper perhaps. More emotionally charged. Human. Understandable. Yet dangerous too. Because children notice emotional differences instantly. The scriptures do not hide this. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons. Pause there, more than all. No ambiguity, no subtlety. Public favoritism, visible favoritism. And then, the coat. The famous coat. Beautiful, special, unique, given publicly. A symbol. Perhaps expensive, certainly meaningful. Modern readers often romanticize this detail. But pause emotionally for a moment. Imagine Joseph's brothers watching father visibly celebrate one son differently. Imagine childhood already shaped by hierarchy. Different mothers, different relationships, different emotional dynamics. And now, a visible reminder appears. He matters differently. Psychologists understand something painful here. Children compare constantly, not because they are selfish, because belonging matters. Who receives attention? Who receives praise? Who receives protection? Who feels chosen? The nervous system quietly asks, where do I stand here? Could Joseph's brothers feel displaced? Absolutely, especially older brothers, especially sons already carrying insecurity. Because favoritism rarely feels neutral. It feels threatening. The sibling receiving more love often becomes symbol of personal lack. He gets what I do not. He matters more. Maybe I matter less. This still happens constantly today. The golden child, the favorite sibling, the child parents brag about, the one receiving special treatment. Families rarely say favoritism aloud. Children feel it anyway. And perhaps nowhere becomes more dangerous than when favoritism mixes with identity. Imagine Joseph growing up, young, loved, special, protected, different. How does this shape person emotionally? Psychologists recognize something important. Favored children often struggle too. Pause there, because this feels uncomfortable. People assume favored children simply benefit. Not always. Special treatment creates pressure, expectation, blindness, Social isolation. The child feels different, separate, sometimes emotionally naive. Protected children often misunderstand resentment growing around them. Could Joseph notice tension fully? Perhaps not. He was young, 17, still trusting, still idealistic, still believing family means safety, still perhaps emotionally unaware of jealousy growing nearby. And then the dreams arrive. Pause there, because dreams change everything. Joseph dreams strange things, symbolic things, powerful things. His brothers bowing, the stars bowing, the future somehow centering around him. Imagine being young, loved differently, already treated specially, now carrying dreams suggesting superiority. Can you imagine how brothers hear this? Not curiosity, threat, arrogance perhaps. Confirmation of fear. Father loves him more. Now he thinks he rules us, too. This matters psychologically. Resentment grows fastest where comparison already exists. People rarely hate strangers intensely. They resent people nearby, people representing something painful. Sibling resentment often grows from emotional wounds, unfairness, comparison, invisible competition, and perhaps Joseph unintentionally intensifies everything, because favored children sometimes lack awareness, not cruel, unaware. The child treated specially may not understand how differently others experience reality. Could Joseph innocently share dreams? Likely. Could brothers interpret arrogance? Also likely. Human beings interpret situations emotionally, especially wounded people. Imagine older brothers emotionally, working harder, older, less favored, watching younger sibling receive coat, attention, affection, dreams of superiority. Could jealousy grow? How could it not? Psychologists understand something unsettling. Perceived unfairness activates intense emotional pain. The brain processes unfair treatment similarly to physical pain, especially inside families, especially where belonging feels threatened. And perhaps this becomes tragedy, because nobody addresses tension. Nobody heals jealousy. Nobody protects relationship. Jacob loves deeply, yet unwisely perhaps. Joseph dreams, yet naively perhaps. Brothers resent, yet silently. Pain grows underground. Families often mistake silence for peace, but silence rarely means peace. Usually, it means pressure, building, unspoken things growing dangerous. This still happens constantly. The sibling rivalry ignored, the child quietly resentful, the parent unintentionally comparing, nobody discussing feelings honestly. Then one day, everything explodes. Psychologists call this accumulated resentment. Small wounds stacking quietly. One unfair moment, then another, until eventually, people no longer react to single moment. They react to years. Could Joseph's brothers secretly carry years of pain? Very likely. The coat becomes symbol. The dreams become symbol. Joseph himself becomes symbol. Not brother anymore. Representation of unfairness. And this matters enormously, because humans hurt symbols easier than humans. The sibling becomes enemy. The coworker becomes threat. The partner becomes problem. Dehumanization begins subtly. He always gets everything. She is the favorite. They do not understand. And suddenly, empathy weakens. Could Joseph's brothers stop seeing him fully? Perhaps. Not immediately. Gradually. Through comparison. Through resentment. Through silence. Through pain nobody healed. Still, let us remain fair. Jacob loved Joseph deeply. This matters. Parents rarely intend harm. Most favoritism grows unconsciously. shared personality, shared emotional closeness, special circumstances, human attachment. Jacob likely never thought, "E will wound my family." He simply loved deeply, but deep love without awareness sometimes harms. This feels painfully modern. The child prays differently, the sibling unnoticed, the comparison nobody admits. Families still fracture exactly this way, not through hatred, through unequal attention. The parent believing, "I love everyone equally." Meanwhile, children experiencing something very different. Could Joseph become vulnerable because of special treatment? Absolutely. Favored children often lack social awareness, assume safety, assume belonging, trust too easily. The child protected emotionally may not recognize danger growing nearby. Joseph walks toward brothers later without fear. Why would he fear? Family means safety, right? Except sometimes the people closest carry deepest resentment. And perhaps that becomes one of the saddest truths in Joseph's story. The love meant to bless him also made him vulnerable, because love given too differently can become dangerous, especially inside insecure families, especially where pain remains unnamed. And somewhere ahead, a field waits. Brothers wait. Jealousy waits. A pit waits. Because resentment ignored rarely disappears. Eventually, it acts. And perhaps Joseph never imagined something terrifying. The people meant to protect him had already begun seeing him as threat instead of brother. Because sometimes the deepest family wounds begin not with cruelty, but with love given unevenly. Before Joseph became ruler, before power, before Egypt, before forgiveness, he was simply a boy trying to understand who he was inside a family, already divided. And perhaps that detail matters more than people realize, because human beings are shaped long before the worst thing happens to them, long before betrayal, long before trauma, long before survival becomes necessary. Identity begins quietly, inside childhood, inside family systems, inside how people are seen, misunderstood, and perhaps nowhere feels more emotionally complicated than the identity of Joseph, because Joseph was many things at once. Loved, yet isolated, gifted, yet vulnerable, confident, yet misunderstood, special, yet strangely lonely. And perhaps that contradiction shaped everything. To understand Joseph, we must first understand difference, because difference changes childhood, especially inside families, especially large families. Imagine growing up among older brothers, stronger brothers, harder brothers, brothers already bonded through years of shared work and struggle. Meanwhile, you are younger, different, the son of the beloved wife, the protected one, the one father treats differently. Can you imagine the emotional atmosphere? Joseph likely sensed tension long before betrayal. Children notice energy quickly. The awkward silences, the strange looks, the teasing, the subtle resentment, the feeling. Something feels different here. Yet perhaps Joseph never fully understood why. Because children growing up love differently often struggle recognizing social reality. Not because they are arrogant, because emotional protection creates blindness. Psychologists understand something important. Children receiving preferential treatment often become emotionally optimistic, trusting, less socially cautious, assuming safety, assuming acceptance. Could Joseph trust too easily? Perhaps. Could he misunderstand how brothers truly felt? Very likely. And perhaps this matters because Joseph seems unusually open, honest, expressive, the kind of person speaking thoughts others would hide. Which brings us to something fascinating: the dreams. Pause there, because dreams changed everything. Joseph dreams vividly. powerfully, strangely, wheat bowing before wheat, stars bowing, the sun and moon bending toward him, symbolic, mysterious, important. But perhaps what matters most psychologically is not only the dreams, but Joseph sharing them. Imagine being teenager, 17, already treated differently, already carrying coats symbolizing favoritism, already emotionally separated from older brothers. And now, you tell them a dream where they bow to you. Pause there. Can you understand how complicated this feels? Modern readers often split unfairly. Either Joseph was arrogant, or Joseph was innocent. Reality feels more human. Perhaps he was sincere, perhaps naive, perhaps unaware. Teenagers often speak without understanding emotional consequences, especially gifted teenagers, especially emotionally protected teenagers. Joseph may have genuinely believed dreams mattered. Why hide them? Why fear honesty? Children receiving emotional security often speak openly. Meanwhile, the brothers hear something entirely different. Not wonder, not mystery, threat. Father loves him more. Now he thinks he rules us too. Psychologists understand something painful. People interpret behavior through existing wounds. If resentment already exists, neutral things feel threatening. Joseph sharing dreams may not actually be arrogance. Yet resentment reshapes perception. This still happens constantly today. The talented sibling, the gifted coworker, the successful friend. People already hurting often interpret confidence as arrogance, sometimes unfairly, sometimes accurately. Could Joseph unintentionally sound proud? Possibly. Could brothers interpret everything negatively already? Also likely. Human relationships rarely feel objective, especially wounded relationships. Still, Joseph feels different than brothers in another way too. He observes, reports, notices behavior. The scriptures mention Joseph bringing negative reports to Jacob. Pause there. This feels important psychologically. What kind of child reports problems? Usually, children deeply aligned emotionally with authority. The trusted child, the responsible child, the child seeking approval. Could Joseph feel emotionally closer to Jacob than brothers? Certainly. Children often align strongly with safest attachment figure. Jacob trusted Joseph, loved Joseph, confided in Joseph perhaps. This creates emotional closeness. But closeness sometimes creates social isolation too. Because siblings notice alliances immediately, the favorite child often becomes outsider unintentionally. Loved, yet disconnected. Protected, yet resented. Included by parent, excluded by siblings. Could Joseph feel lonely even while loved? Perhaps. This matters because gifted children often experience hidden loneliness. The child treated differently struggles belonging, especially emotionally sensitive children, especially dreamers. And Joseph feels like dreamer. Pause there. Dreamers see life differently. They imagine possibility, meaning, future. They feel things deeply, think symbolically. Dreamers often struggle fitting inside practical worlds, especially tough environments. Imagine Joseph beside rugged older brothers, workers, survivors, physical men. Meanwhile, Joseph dreams, reflects, shares symbolic thoughts. Can you imagine teasing? Mockery, dismissal, the dreamer, the spoiled child, the soft one. Families often misunderstand different children, especially sensitive children, especially imaginative children. Psychologists recognize this pattern deeply. Sensitive children often become misunderstood children, called dramatic, too emotional, too idealistic, too different. Yet sensitivity often carries unusual strengths too. Empathy, vision, creativity, emotional awareness. Could Joseph's emotional sensitivity later help survival? Very likely, because trauma survivors often rely heavily on imagination and meaning-making. Still, let us ask difficult question. Was Joseph spoiled? Perhaps partially. This feels uncomfortable but fair. Favored children sometimes grow emotionally unaware. Special treatment changes perspective. The child protected too much may struggle understanding others' pain. Could Joseph unintentionally intensify resentment? Possibly. Teenagers often lack awareness. The coat, the dreams, the closeness with father, the reporting, all together. Perhaps Joseph unintentionally represented something painful. The sibling getting everything. The son everyone compares themselves against. Not malicious, just young, just unaware. This matters because misunderstood people often become symbols unfairly. Joseph stops becoming brother. He becomes problem. He becomes reminder of unfairness. He becomes threat. Psychologists understand something devastating. People dehumanize easier when resentment grows. He thinks he is better. She always wins. They get everything. And slowly, the real person disappears. Only projection remains. Could Joseph feel misunderstood? Imagine trying sincerely to share dreams, only to receive anger, trying to connect, yet feeling disliked. Still believing family means safety, yet sensing emotional distance. Many sensitive children understand this pain deeply. The child asking, "Why do not people like me? What did I do wrong? Why do I feel different?" Difference often creates loneliness, especially inside families. And perhaps Joseph quietly carried outsider, feeling long before betrayal. Loved by father, yet disconnected from brothers. Chosen, yet isolated. Special, yet lonely. This contradiction matters enormously, because later betrayal becomes even more traumatic. Psychologists call this attachment rupture, when the people expected to protect suddenly become threat. Especially devastating for trusting people. Especially devastating for optimistic people. Joseph still trusted family, still walked toward brothers, still believed belonging remained possible. This innocence feels heartbreaking, because innocent people rarely see betrayal coming. Still, perhaps Joseph carried something powerful too. Resilience, hope, meaning. Dreamers often survive suffering differently. Dreamers believe tomorrow exists, meaning exists, future exists. Perhaps Joseph's greatest strength already lived inside him. The refusal to believe pain would be final. He did not know. Slavery waited. Prison waited. False accusations waited. Loneliness waited. Yet somehow, the dreamer inside him remained alive. And perhaps that becomes one of the deepest mysteries in Joseph's story. How did betrayal fail to destroy him? Maybe because dreamers survive differently. Dreamers carry future even when present collapses. Still, the dreamer was about to face something terrifying. A field, brothers watching from distance. Resentment finally boiling over. And perhaps Joseph never imagined the most painful truth. Sometimes the people misunderstanding you most. Yare, the very people who once called themselves family. There are betrayals people eventually forget. The friend who disappears, the stranger who lies, the coworker who disappoints. Painful, yes, but survivable. Time softens distance. Life moves forward. But family betrayal feels different. Because family becomes the place humans first learn safety, trust, belonging, home. And when home becomes dangerous, something breaks deeper. Because perhaps no wound cuts more sharply than pain delivered by people who once knew your childhood. People who knew your laughter, your fears, your name before the world learned it. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more psychologically devastating than Joseph's betrayal. Because Joseph was not abandoned by strangers, not harmed by enemies, not betrayed by outsiders. He was betrayed by blood. Pause there. Blood. Brothers. Family. The people supposed to protect him. And perhaps that detail changes everything. Because before trauma, there was trust. Joseph walked toward his brothers, believing something simple. Family may be complicated, but family is safe. Imagine the day. A father sends son to check on brothers. Ordinary responsibility. Ordinary concern. Jacob worries. The brothers are far away. Go see if they are safe. Simple. Normal. Joseph obeys. Can you imagine his emotional state? Perhaps hopeful. Perhaps trying again. Perhaps still longing for closeness. Many younger siblings understand this feeling, the constant hope. Maybe things will feel better today. Maybe tension disappears. Maybe belonging returns. Joseph walks toward familiar faces. The field stretches open. Distance slowly closes. And then they see him. Pause there, because what happens next feels terrifyingly human. The brothers see Joseph coming. The coat, the dreams, the symbol of favoritism, everything unresolved, suddenly standing before them. And someone says something chilling. Here comes the dreamer. Not Joseph, not brother. The dreamer. Identity reduced, humanity reduced. Pause there again. Psychologists understand something dangerous about resentment. People hurt others more easily once empathy weakens. Once person becomes symbol, not brother anymore. Problem, threat, reminder of unfairness. This still happens constantly. The sibling representing comparison, the coworker representing insecurity, the friend representing jealousy. People stop seeing person and start seeing pain. Could Joseph's brothers quietly stop seeing him fully? Perhaps, because resentment rarely appears overnight. Years of favoritism, years of comparison, years of feeling second. The coat, the dreams, the father's obvious love, the younger brother somehow standing above older brothers emotionally. Pain stacked slowly, quietly, until one day, pressure finally breaks. And then, the horrifying decision, kill him. Pause there. Can you imagine? Not strangers, discussing violence. Brothers, people sharing meals, childhood memories, stories, games. Family, now, talking murder. How does this happen? Psychologists offer painful answer. Unhealed resentment becomes dangerous, especially inside families, especially where unfairness feels chronic. Ignored pain mutates, jealousy deepens, empathy shrinks. Anger justifies things previously unimaginable. Could they really hate him that much? Maybe hatred misses point. Perhaps pain felt louder than love. This matters, because humans often hurt most where they hurt most. Still, something interrupts. One brother hesitates. Joseph spared. For now. Instead, the pit. Pause there, because perhaps the pit matters psychologically more than people realize. Imagine Joseph emotionally. No explanation, no warning. One moment walking toward family. Next moment, violence. Hands grabbing. The coat ripped away. Voices shouting. Suddenly, darkness. Silence. Isolation. Can you imagine the confusion? Why? What happened? Please stop. The scriptures stay quiet. But trauma experts understand something important. Sudden betrayal overwhelms the nervous system. Reality breaks. The mind struggles understanding. The people expected to protect suddenly become danger. This creates something called betrayal trauma, one of the deepest psychological wounds humans experience, especially when trusted relationships become unsafe. The nervous system learns terrifying lesson. People close to me can hurt me. Love does not guarantee safety. Family cannot always be trusted. Many adults still secretly carry this wound. The parent who abandoned, the sibling who betrayed, the relative who harmed, the family rejection nobody talks about. Because family pain lingers differently, you expect strangers to disappoint? You do not expect home to collapse. And perhaps Joseph still believed rescue might come. Maybe someone would explain. Maybe someone would apologize. Maybe brothers would calm down. But then, something worse happens. The brothers sit and eat. Pause there. Eat. Can you imagine? Joseph inside pit. Terrified. Crying perhaps. Begging perhaps. And above. Life continues. Food continues. Conversation continues. How devastating. Psychologists recognize something brutal here. Trauma intensifies when suffering gets ignored. Not only pain, abandonment inside pain. The feeling, my suffering does not matter. Many trauma survivors describe this as deepest wound, not simply what happened, but that nobody stopped it. Nobody protected them. Nobody noticed enough. Could Joseph feel invisible suddenly? Worthless suddenly? Disposable suddenly? Perhaps. Then, a caravan appears. Opportunity, not rescue. Profit. Someone says, "Why kill him? Let us sell him." Pause there again. Sell him. The word feels unbearable, because now betrayal becomes transaction. Joseph no longer brother. Commodity. Object. Something disposable. Imagine emotional devastation. The realization, my family is choosing life without me. Not accident. Choice. This still happens today. The child rejected emotionally. The sibling cut off. The family choosing silence instead of repair. The parent abandoning responsibility. People quietly experiencing same emotional message. You no longer belong here. Psychologists understand rejection pain deeply. Social rejection activates same brain regions as physical pain. Humans literally experience exclusion as injury, especially family exclusion, especially sibling betrayal. Could Joseph carry lifelong trust wounds after this? Very likely. Hypervigilance, fear of abandonment, difficulty trusting safety. This would make sense psychologically. Still, Joseph survives. The caravan moves, chains perhaps, distance growing, home disappearing. Can you imagine looking backward, watching childhood vanish, watching safety disappear, knowing family chose this? Many people know this grief. The divorce splitting family, the betrayal changing holidays forever, the sibling relationship dying, the moment family no longer feels like home. And perhaps something deeper breaks too. Identity. Pause there, because family helps shape self. Who am I? Where do I belong? I loved. Family answers these questions early, but betrayal disrupts identity deeply. If family rejects me, who am I now? If brothers sell me, was I ever truly loved? Could Joseph quietly ask these questions? Likely. Psychologists recognize this as attachment rupture, identity destabilizing after relational trauma. Still, something fascinating survives. Joseph does not stop dreaming. Pause there. This matters enormously, because trauma often steals future. People stop imagining tomorrow, stop hoping, stop trusting meaning. Yet somehow, something inside Joseph remains alive. perhaps fragile, perhaps wounded, but alive. The dreamer survives. This feels extraordinary because many people secretly fear betrayal destroys everything: trust, hope, identity, purpose. And, yes, betrayal changes people deeply. But perhaps Joseph whispers something unexpected. Pain changes identity, without necessarily ending identity. Still, let us remain honest. The wound was real, deeply real. Years later, Joseph still weeps remembering family, still struggles emotionally, still carries scars. Healing never erased betrayal. This matters, because modern culture sometimes romanticizes survival. He got stronger. He overcame. True, perhaps, but wounds remain. Strong people still ache. Survivors still grieve. Forgiveness does not erase trauma. And perhaps this becomes Joseph's deepest human relevance, because many people secretly ask, can family betrayal ever heal? Can trust return? Can identity survive rejection? Can broken relationships ever stop hurting? Joseph's story does not offer easy answers, only difficult hope, because before healing, there must first be survival. Before forgiveness, there must first be grief. And before restoration, there must first be loneliness. Because somewhere ahead, Joseph still faces slavery, false accusation, prison, years of silence. And the wounded boy sold by brothers will soon face terrifying question. What survives inside a person after the people who should have loved them most choose to let them go? Some pain arrives all at once, like betrayal, a single moment splitting life into before and after. But other pain arrives slowly, quietly. One injustice after another, one disappointment after another, one hope disappearing at a time, until eventually, people stop asking, why is this happening? And begin asking something darker. Will this ever end? Because perhaps no suffering feels heavier than suffering that refuses explanation, especially suffering you did not deserve, especially suffering after already surviving betrayal. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more emotionally exhausting than Joseph's years between the pit and the palace. Because people often remember Joseph backward, the ruler, the success story, the miracle, the happy ending. But history moves too quickly. Because before restoration, there was slavery. Before power, humiliation. Before forgiveness, years of unanswered pain. And perhaps the hardest part, Joseph did nothing to deserve most of it. Imagine the caravan moving farther from home, every mile increasing distance, every hour making betrayal feel more real. The brothers gone, the familiar land disappearing, the realization slowly settling. No one is coming for me. Pause there, because perhaps this becomes first true trauma, not simply betrayal. Abandonment, the nervous system finally understanding. Safety is over. Psychologists understand something devastating. Trauma often begins where control disappears, especially relational trauma, especially sudden loss. The child once protected suddenly learning terrifying lesson. No one can stop this. Imagine Joseph emotionally, 17, young, still developing identity, still emotionally vulnerable. And now, property, sold, owned, no freedom, no certainty, no family, no home. Many trauma survivors understand this exact emotional collapse. The life you trusted suddenly disappearing, the future becoming unrecognizable overnight. And perhaps Joseph quietly asks same question millions still ask, who am I now? Because trauma fractures identity. The son becomes slave. The dreamer becomes prisoner of circumstance. The loved child becomes forgotten child. everything familiar disappears. Still, something remarkable happens. Joseph survives. Pause there, because survival itself matters, especially after trauma. Many people underestimate this. They ask, why was not he stronger? Why did not he move on faster? But survival often becomes full-time work. Eating, sleeping, functioning, continuing. Sometimes surviving itself becomes courage. Joseph enters Egypt. Foreign culture, foreign language, foreign people, everything unfamiliar. Imagine emotional isolation. Nobody understanding history. Nobody knowing your pain. Nobody remembering your real name. Many immigrants, refugees, trauma survivors understand this loneliness deeply. The feeling, he used to belong somewhere. Now, barely know who I am. And yet, Joseph works, lives, adapts. Eventually, he enters house of a powerful man, Potiphar. Perhaps for first time in years, something begins rebuilding. Routine, stability, competence. Joseph works well, earns trust, rises slowly. Pause there, because trauma survivors often develop unusual strengths. Hyper-awareness, responsibility, emotional intelligence, work ethic. People surviving hardship frequently adapt quickly. Joseph may have learned something painful but powerful. If life feels unsafe, become useful. Many adults still live exactly this way. The wounded child becomes overachiever. The rejected child becomes highly competent. The traumatized person learns performance because competence feels safer than vulnerability. Psychologists sometimes call this adaptive resilience, pain creating capability. Not ideal, but effective. Could Joseph quietly pour himself into work because work felt controllable? Perhaps. Unlike family, unlike betrayal, unlike abandonment, work obeyed effort. Effort felt safer than trust, and for a moment, life seems stabilizing. Perhaps hope quietly returns. Maybe healing feels possible. Maybe suffering finally slows. Then, everything collapses again. Pause there, because trauma survivors often know this fear intimately. The moment things start improving, another disaster comes. Hope becomes dangerous. Trust becomes risky. And Joseph faces another devastating injustice. Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him. Imagine the emotional devastation. You already survived betrayal, already lost home, already rebuilt life slowly, already proved loyalty. And now, false accusation, punished for something you did not do. Pause there again. Because injustice wounds differently. People can survive deserved consequence easier than undeserved suffering. When punishment feels unfair, meaning fractures, the mind struggles. Psychologists understand this deeply. Humans need coherence. We want suffering to make sense. Bad choices, consequences, hard work, reward, good behavior, safety. But Joseph's story destroys this illusion. He acts honorably, still suffers, resists temptation, still loses, behaves rightly, still punished. How frustrating, how heartbreaking, how painfully human. Many people secretly understand this exact grief. The loyal partner betrayed anyway. The honest worker fired unfairly. The good parent still struggling. The kind person still abandoned. Life sometimes refuses fairness, and unfairness creates spiritual exhaustion. The question changes. No longer, why me? Now, what is the point? Still, Joseph enters prison. Pause there. Prison. Imagine emotional collapse. The pit. Slavery. False accusation. Now prison. At what point does hope disappear? Many trauma survivors understand cumulative suffering. One pain manageable, then another, until nervous system grows tired, emotionally numb, spiritually exhausted. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. Repeated suffering convincing people nothing changes. No matter what I do, life hurts anyway. Many people quietly live here. The depression after repeated disappointment, the exhaustion after betrayal, the feeling nothing improves. Maybe this is just life. Could Joseph feel hopeless? Honestly, how could he not? Yet somehow, he survives again. Pause there. This feels extraordinary, because survival during prolonged injustice requires something profound, meaning. Psychologists increasingly recognize this. Humans endure suffering better when meaning survives. If pain feels meaningless, people collapse faster. If pain carries possibility, hope survives longer. Could Joseph still secretly believe dreams mattered? Perhaps. Maybe. Dreamer inside remained alive. Not loudly, not confidently, quietly. Fragile, but alive. And prison changes him too. People suffering deeply often develop unusual wisdom, compassion, patience, emotional insight. Joseph listens, interprets dreams, helps others. Interesting detail. The betrayed person still helping. The forgotten person still noticing forgotten people. Perhaps suffering deepened empathy. Still, even kindness disappoints. Joseph helps prisoners, interprets dreams. 1. Promises. E will remember you. Pause there. How hopeful must that feel? Finally, someone sees me. Finally, someone can help. Finally, escape possible. Then, silence. Forgotten. Again, can you imagine emotional pain? Forgotten. Again. Abandoned. Again. Many people know this feeling. The message unanswered. The promise broken. The support disappearing. Life repeating old wounds. Psychologists recognize something painful. Trauma often reopens through repetition. The abandoned child feels abandonment more intensely later. The betrayed person fears betrayal everywhere. Joseph may quietly relive brother pain repeatedly. Trust breaking, people leaving, hope collapsing. And yet, years pass, still surviving, still breathing, still enduring, still somehow refusing total collapse. This matters enormously, because many people underestimate quiet resilience. Not dramatic resilience, ordinary resilience. Getting up, continuing, surviving another day. Sometimes survival itself becomes sacred. Joseph could not control injustice, could not erase betrayal, could not speed rescue. But somehow, pain did not fully erase identity. The dreamer remained, wounded, tired, lonely, but alive. And perhaps this becomes one of Joseph's deepest lessons. Sometimes survival looks unimpressive, messy, exhausted, uncertain. Yet survival still matters, especially when life refuses fairness, especially when hope feels fragile. Because somewhere ahead, one forgotten prisoner still waits, still wondering if suffering means anything, still wondering if dreams mattered. And suddenly, everything will change. A king will dream, a prison door will open, and the boy once sold by brothers will finally face terrifying question. What happens when the pain that almost destroyed you suddenly becomes the reason people need you? History loves simple heroes, the strong survivor, the faithful believer, the person who suffers beautifully and somehow never breaks. Clean stories, comfortable stories, but real human beings. Real human beings are rarely that simple. especially traumatized human beings, especially betrayed children who grow into powerful adults. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture does emotional complexity feel more misunderstood than in the story of Joseph. Because for centuries, Joseph has often been remembered as almost superhuman, faithful, patient, wise, forgiving, a man who trusted God through suffering, the survivor who never lost hope. The son betrayal could not destroy. Beautiful story. Inspiring story. Except, human psychology quietly asks harder questions. What if Joseph was not only resilient? What if he was wounded too? What if survival left scars? What if forgiveness cost more emotionally than people realize? Because perhaps the real controversy surrounding Joseph is not, did he survive? Clearly he did. The harder question is, was Joseph truly emotionally whole? Or simply extraordinarily functional despite trauma? Pause there, because many people secretly live inside this tension. Successful, competent, kind, yet quietly hurting. The outside functioning beautifully, while unresolved pain quietly survives underneath. Psychologists understand something important. Trauma survivors often appear unusually strong, especially high-functioning survivors, especially people forced to adapt early. The child abandoned learns competence. The rejected child learns resilience. The traumatized child learns emotional control. People admire them. Meanwhile, nobody asks what survival cost internally. Could Joseph fit this pattern? Perhaps more than people realize. Let us look honestly. Joseph was 17 when betrayal happened. Pause there. 17. Still adolescent. Still emotionally developing. Still forming identity. And suddenly, family rejection, violence, abandonment, slavery, years of instability. Psychologists understand something painful. Trauma during identity formation changes development deeply, especially betrayal trauma, especially family betrayal, because family becomes emotional blueprint, safety, trust, belonging. When betrayal enters there, the nervous system changes. Could Joseph secretly struggle trust? How could he not? Imagine emotional lesson learned young. People closest may betray. Love shifts suddenly. Safety disappears unexpectedly. The people promising protection may become danger. This changes attachment. Psychologists call this relational trauma. Difficulty trusting deeply. Hyper-awareness, fear of abandonment, emotional caution. Could Joseph quietly carry these wounds into adulthood? Likely. And perhaps nowhere becomes more revealing than Egypt. Joseph becomes incredibly competent. Pause there. Competence after trauma matters psychologically. Trauma survivors often become exceptional performers. Why? Because competence creates safety. Control creates safety. Usefulness creates value. The child, once powerless, becomes adult, determined never to feel powerless again. Joseph succeeds everywhere. Potiphar's house, prison, government, leadership, administration, problem solving. Impressive, remarkable. Yet psychology asks uncomfortable question. Was excellence partly survival? Could Joseph work so hard because usefulness felt emotionally safer than vulnerability? Many adults secretly live this exact pattern. The overachiever, the perfectionist, the successful executive, the person everyone admires. Meanwhile, success quietly functions as protection. If I stay valuable, people won't abandon me. If I stay useful, he remains safe. Could Joseph unconsciously live this way? Possibly. This matters enormously, because trauma survivors often confuse performance with worth, especially children rejected early. Still, Joseph rises to enormous power. Eventually, second only to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, power, influence, security. Everything once stolen suddenly restored. Yet something fascinating happens. When brothers return, Joseph does not immediately reveal himself. Pause there. This moment matters psychologically. Why hide identity? Why test brothers? Why create emotional tension? Many theologians interpret wisdom, testing repentance, testing character. Fair enough, but psychologists notice something else too. Fear, emotional caution, unresolved wounds. Because betrayal survivors often struggle vulnerability, especially with people causing original pain. Could Joseph fear being hurt again? Of course. Could he need proof before trusting? Absolutely. This feels deeply human. Imagine seeing brothers again, the faces, the voices, the people once destroying childhood. How does body react? Trauma experts understand something called trigger activation. The nervous system remembers, even years later, even after success, even after healing. The body remembers fear. Could Joseph feel anger, grief, confusion, longing? Certainly. Humans often carry mixed emotions toward family wounds, love and resentment, compassion and pain, hope and fear. Nothing simple. Joseph tests them, accuses them, creates emotional pressure, keeps Simeon, hides identity. Some readers struggle here. Why manipulate? Why prolong pain? Could healed person not simply forgive immediately? Perhaps, but trauma rarely works cleanly. Forgiveness after betrayal feels complicated, especially family betrayal, especially childhood betrayal. Psychologists increasingly recognize something important. Forgiveness does not erase fear. Forgiveness does not instantly restore trust. Forgiveness often happens slowly, messily, with hesitation. Could Joseph genuinely forgive while still emotionally protecting himself? Absolutely. This nuance matters deeply. And then, something extraordinary happens. Joseph weeps. Again and again. Pause there. Notice this carefully. Joseph cries repeatedly throughout reunion story. Not once. Repeatedly. Why? Because pain survived. Grief survived. The successful ruler still carried wounded son somewhere inside. Strong people cry too. Survivors cry too. Functioning adults still ache. This matters because modern culture often romanticizes resilience. The trauma survivor becomes motivational story. He overcame. She got stronger. Beautiful. Yet incomplete. Healing rarely means pain disappears. Healing means pain stops controlling everything. Joseph may still grieve deeply. The childhood lost. The years stolen. The father missed. The loneliness endured. The betrayal remembered. And yet, he continues. This feels psychologically realistic. Still, let us ask harder theological question. Was Joseph blessed? Certainly. Power arrived. Purpose emerged. Restoration happened. Nations survived famine. Family reunited. But perhaps uncomfortable truth exists too. Blessing and suffering coexist. Pause there, because many people secretly misunderstand blessing. Blessing does not always erase wounds. Success does not erase trauma. Faith does not erase nervous system memory. Could Joseph still wake remembering pit? Possibly. Could abandonment still hurt? Likely. Could forgiveness still require emotional courage? Absolutely. Modern psychology increasingly understands something beautiful. Trauma survivors can become deeply compassionate people because pain expands empathy. Joseph feeds starving people, protects nations, reunites family. Perhaps suffering deepened humanity, but deepened humanity through pain, not despite pain. Could Joseph become emotionally wiser precisely because of suffering? Very likely. Still, some critics ask difficult question. Was Joseph arrogant early? The dreams, the sharing, the favoritism. Could youthful immaturity partly contribute to resentment? Fair question. Joseph may not be entirely passive victim. Naive perhaps, insensitive perhaps. Teenagers often lack awareness. Still, nothing justifies betrayal. Nothing justifies slavery. Nothing justifies abandonment. Both truths coexist. Human complexity again. This may be why Joseph feels so relevant. Because modern people secretly ask same question. Am I healed? Or just functioning? Am I strong? Or simply adapted? Did suffering deepen me? Or harden me? Can successful people still be wounded? The answer feels deeply human. Yes, Joseph may have been both, blessed and wounded, faithful and grieving, forgiving and scarred, strong and still healing. Because trauma survivors rarely become either broken or perfect, usually they become complicated, beautifully complicated, and perhaps Joseph leaves humanity one haunting truth. The strongest people in room are sometimes not the least wounded. They are simply the people who learned how to carry wounds without letting wounds destroy everything. And perhaps deepest question Joseph still asks us is this: Are the scars you carry proof you are damaged forever? Or proof you survived what should have broken you? Because perhaps healing was never about becoming untouched. Perhaps healing means learning how to remain human, even after pain tried teaching you otherwise. What if Joseph lived today? Not in ancient Egypt, not inside palaces, not interpreting dreams for kings, but here, now, inside modern families, modern trauma, modern loneliness. Would we recognize him? Or would he simply look like someone quietly surviving beside us? Because perhaps the uncomfortable truth is this: the world is full of Josephs, people smiling politely, while secretly carrying wounds nobody fully sees. Successful people, reliable people, kind people. Yet underneath, children who learned far too early that love can disappear suddenly. Because maybe Joseph never disappeared. Maybe he simply changed clothes, changed language, changed environment. But the wound stayed painfully familiar. Imagine modern Joseph growing up. Sensitive, bright, creative, different. The child dreaming bigger than people around him. Imaginative, hopeful, emotionally expressive. The kind of child teachers notice quickly. Parents celebrate quickly, and perhaps without meaning harm. One parent loves him a little too visibly, praises him differently, protects him differently, posts more photos, talks about him more proudly. Pause there. Families still do this constantly, not cruelly. Unconsciously, the special child, the talented child, the sensitive child, the one reminding parent of themselves. Meanwhile, other siblings notice. Children always notice. Who gets celebrated? Who gets defended? Who receives emotional closeness? Psychologists understand this deeply. Perceived favoritism creates sibling resentment fast, especially where insecurity already exists. Modern Joseph may not understand danger growing around him. Why would he? Children love differently, often trust family deeply. Maybe siblings tease him, roll eyes at him, mock dreams, call him dramatic, too emotional, too sensitive, too ambitious. Many gifted children understand this pain. The child feeling strangely different inside own family, loved, yet isolated. Special, yet lonely. And perhaps Joseph still shares dreams. Not literal dreams, perhaps, but ambition, ideas, goals, plans bigger than environment understands. He wants to do something meaningful. He thinks life has bigger purpose. He wants something different. And suddenly, people react strangely. Psychologists recognize something uncomfortable. People sometimes attack what secretly threatens them. The sibling feeling stuck, resents, ambitious. Sibling. The insecure friend mocks success. The family member interprets growth as rejection. Modern Joseph may hear, "You think you're better than us. You changed. Who do you think you are?" This still happens constantly, because growth often threatens insecure systems, especially family systems. Now imagine betrayal. Pause there, because modern Joseph likely experiences betrayal too. Maybe siblings gossip, turn against him, exclude him. Maybe family conflict becomes toxic. Maybe inheritance disputes happen. Maybe emotional abandonment happens. Or perhaps something even quieter. The family simply stops showing up emotionally. Many adults secretly carry same wound. Not dramatic betrayal, emotional betrayal. The parent never protecting, the sibling disappearing, the family minimizing pain. Psychologists call this attachment injury. When trusted relationships fail during emotional need, could modern Joseph struggle trust afterward? Absolutely. Trauma changes nervous systems. The abandoned child becomes cautious adult, hyper-aware, watching for rejection, watching for betrayal, waiting for disappointment. Many high-achieving adults secretly live exactly here. And perhaps nowhere feels more Joseph-like than resilience after suffering. Imagine modern Joseph after betrayal. Instead of collapsing, he adapts, works harder, studies harder, builds career, learns emotional discipline. People admire him. He is so resilient. She is amazing. Look how successful they became. Pause there, because resilience looks beautiful externally. But psychology asks harder question. What did survival cost internally? Many trauma survivors become extraordinary performers. The child abandoned becomes hyper-independent. The rejected child becomes highly successful. The betrayed child becomes emotionally self-sufficient. Not because healing finished, because dependence feels dangerous. Could modern Joseph become workaholic? Possibly. The person pouring identity into achievement. Career feels safer than relationships. Success feels safer than vulnerability. Because work obeys effort. People do not always. Many adults secretly live this exact pattern. High-functioning trauma. Outwardly thriving. Internally exhausted. Successful, yet emotionally lonely. Competent, yet afraid intimacy disappears. Modern Joseph may rise professionally fast. Leadership, management, business, politics. Psychologists increasingly notice something fascinating. Many highly successful leaders survived instability early. Trauma sharpens awareness, problem-solving, adaptability, emotional intelligence. Joseph in Egypt survived because he adapted quickly. Modern Joseph might too. The immigrant succeeding, the entrepreneur rebuilding after collapse, the executive carrying invisible childhood wounds, the person everyone admires, without noticing how survival built success. Still, relationships become difficult. Pause there, because betrayal, trauma changes love deeply. Modern Joseph may struggle trust, want closeness, yet fear closeness, love deeply, yet emotionally protect himself constantly. Psychologists call this earned security struggle. The person learning connection slowly because early trust broke. Maybe Joseph dates cautiously, tests loyalty quietly, struggles vulnerability, fear whispering constantly. People leave, people betray, people change suddenly. This matters enormously, because many trauma survivors feel guilty for struggling. Trust, yet struggle makes sense. The nervous system protects what pain once endangered. Still, something beautiful may survive too. Empathy. Pause there. Joseph suffered deeply, and suffering often creates unusual compassion. Modern Joseph may become person helping others, mentoring, supporting, listening. The person saying, "You know what it feels like." Psychologists increasingly understand something hopeful. Trauma survivors often become deeply empathetic adults. Pain expanding emotional awareness. Not automatically, but often. Could Joseph become therapist, coach, leader, teacher, social advocate? Possibly. The wounded child becoming safe person for others. Still, family wounds remain complicated. Imagine modern Joseph reconnecting with family later. Years pass. Success happens. And suddenly, the people hurting him need help. Pause there. Can you imagine emotional complexity? Anger, love, grief, compassion, bitterness, longing, everything mixing together. Modern adults know this feeling deeply. The parent aging after painful childhood, the sibling apologizing late, the family wanting connection again. Forgiveness becomes messy, not instant, not simple. Could modern Joseph forgive? Perhaps, but forgiveness after trauma feels complicated. Psychologists understand something important. Forgiveness does not mean pretending pain never mattered. Forgiveness means refusing to let pain own future completely. This matters because many people misunderstand strong survivors. The smiling, successful person, the high achiever, the emotionally wise friend. Sometimes underneath lives child still quietly grieving. Joseph likely understood this tension. Strong, yet wounded. Successful, yet remembering pit. Powerful, yet still crying when brothers returned. Healing never erased history. And perhaps this becomes Joseph's deepest relevance today. Because modern culture worships success, people see outcome, not process. The promotion, the business, the confidence. Nobody sees panic attacks, loneliness, trust issues, the invisible work, survival required. Modern Joseph may look impressive externally, yet privately ask same question many survivors ask. Did suffering make me stronger, or simply teach me how to survive better? Still, hope remains, because Joseph's story never becomes bitterness story. Pause there. This matters deeply. Pain shaped him without fully hardening him. Trauma wounded him without stealing humanity. Success arrived, yet compassion survived. And perhaps modern Joseph whispers something powerful to wounded people everywhere. You are allowed to hurt, allowed to grieve, allowed to struggle, trusting, and still, you can build meaningful life. Because resilience does not mean suffering never happened. Resilience means suffering happened, and somehow hope survived anyway. And perhaps the deepest question Joseph still asks modern people is this: will your pain become the reason you stop trusting life? Or the reason you finally understand people who are hurting too? Because sometimes the people shining brightest learned how to survive very dark places first. Some pain destroys people. That is true. Some betrayals harden hearts. Some suffering leaves scars so deep life never feels the same again. Some losses reshape identity permanently. We should be honest about this. Pain is not small. Pain is not poetic. Pain hurts deeply, because sometimes people hear stories like Joseph's and quietly, feel ashamed. Well, suffering made him stronger. Pain gave him purpose. Everything worked out, and secretly they wonder, why does not my pain feel meaningful? Pause there, because perhaps one of the deepest lessons of Joseph's story begins with honesty. Pain does not automatically improve people. Pain is not magic. Suffering alone teaches nothing. Some people become bitter. Some collapse. Some lose hope. Some stop trusting. Some stop dreaming. And honestly, who could blame them? Because betrayal changes people. Loneliness changes people. Years of injustice change people. Joseph knew this. The pit changed him. Slavery changed him. Prison changed him. Being forgotten changed him. Nothing about suffering felt easy. Nothing about waiting felt fair. This matters enormously, because modern culture often romanticizes survival. The inspirational quote, the comeback story, the triumphant ending. Yet real suffering feels messier, more exhausting, more confusing. Joseph likely had moments of despair, moments of exhaustion, moments asking impossible questions. Why me? Did family ever love me? Will life ever change? Do dreams still matter? Psychologists understand something important. Trauma survivors often move between hope and hopelessness repeatedly. Healing rarely feels linear. Some days strong, some days exhausted, some days trusting, some days afraid. Could Joseph quietly struggle? How could he not? Still, something fascinating survived. The dreamer remained alive. Pause there. This matters more than people realize. Because perhaps Joseph's deepest strength was not avoiding pain, but refusing to let pain become final authority. Pain changed him, but pain did not become entire identity. This feels deeply important, because many people secretly build identity around suffering. The betrayed person, the abandoned child, the failure, the victim, the rejected partner, the forgotten friend. And yes, pain matters, wounds matter, trauma matters. But perhaps Joseph quietly whispers something dangerous to hopelessness. Pain happened to you. Pain does not have to become all of you. Pause there again, because this distinction changes lives. You were betrayed, different from you became betrayal. You were rejected, different from you became unworthy. You suffered, different from you stopped having purpose. Joseph lost family, yet purpose survived. Lost freedom, yet dignity survived. Lost certainty, yet meaning survived. And perhaps nowhere feels more powerful than prison. Imagine prison honestly. No timeline, no guarantees, no rescue plan. Years disappearing, dreams feeling ridiculous. Many adults secretly understand emotional prisons exactly like this. The depression lasting years, the career collapse, the grief refusing to leave, the illness changing everything, the betrayal still hurting 10 years later, the feeling, life forgot me. And perhaps Joseph teaches something painfully hopeful. Meaning sometimes survives before answers arrive. Psychologists increasingly recognize this. Humans endure suffering better when meaning survives. Not explanation, meaning, the belief. My story may still matter. Something valuable may still exist. May still become someone. Could Joseph fully understand purpose while suffering? Probably not. This matters deeply, because many people wait for understanding before continuing. Will trust life when things make sense. Will move forward once pain explains itself. But Joseph likely had no explanation. Only survival, only faith, only small choices repeated daily. Working, helping, continuing, breathing. Sometimes purpose hides quietly inside ordinary endurance. This feels important for modern people because social media teaches something dangerous. Big purpose, big transformation, big breakthroughs. Yet sometimes purpose begins smaller, surviving, trying again, remaining kind, not giving up completely. Trauma survivors understand this courage deeply. The courage to continue ordinary life after extraordinary pain. Joseph likely lived this courage daily. Still, the most famous sentence arrives later, when Joseph finally speaks to brothers, the people who destroyed childhood, the people creating years of suffering. And Joseph says something extraordinary. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Pause there, carefully. This sentence gets misunderstood constantly. Joseph does not say, what happened was good. He does not say, betrayal did not hurt. He does not say, pain was acceptable. No, the harm remained real. The grief remained real. The years remained lost, but somehow, meaning emerged anyway. This matters enormously. Psychologists increasingly understand something called post-traumatic growth. Not trauma becoming good, trauma sometimes producing unexpected depth. Wisdom, compassion, resilience, purpose, empathy. The person surviving darkness sometimes understands humanity differently. Could Joseph feed nations without suffering? Maybe not. Could Joseph understand hunger without loss? Maybe not. Could Joseph forgive deeply without heartbreak? Maybe not. Pain changed him, yet change became meaningful. This feels deeply hopeful, because many people fear suffering ruined life forever. The divorce, the betrayal, the lost years, the addiction, the grief, and yes, pain changes futures, sometimes permanently. But Joseph quietly suggests another possibility. Brokenness and purpose can coexist. Wounds and meaning can coexist. Grief and growth can coexist. You do not need untouched life to build meaningful life. Pause there, because modern people desperately need permission to hear this. You are allowed to still hurt, still grieve, still struggle, still carry scars, and still, meaning remains possible. Joseph never became untouched person. He became transformed person. The wound remained memory, but memory stopped owning future completely. This becomes one of deepest truths about healing. Healing does not mean becoming person who never suffered. Healing means suffering no longer gets final word. And perhaps nowhere feels more beautiful than Joseph feeding people during famine. Think carefully. The abandoned son becomes provider. The betrayed brother becomes protector. The forgotten prisoner becomes life-giver. Pause there, because perhaps this becomes sacred truth. Sometimes the places hurting us most eventually become places teaching us what others need. The lonely person notices lonely people. The grieving person comforts grief. The rejected person creates belonging. The wounded person becomes safe place. Pain shaping compassion, not because suffering feels good, because suffering teaches depth. Still, let us remain honest. Some viewers may quietly ask, what if my story never ends like Joseph's? What if restoration never fully comes? Fair question, because not every ending feels dramatic. Not every pain becomes palace. Not every loss restores completely. Yet perhaps Joseph offers gentler hope. Purpose was never only palace. Purpose lived inside survival too. Inside kindness. Inside refusing bitterness. Inside remaining human after pain. And maybe that matters most, because perhaps the deepest lesson Joseph leaves humanity is not everything will work out perfectly. Perhaps the deeper lesson sounds more honest. The worst thing happening to you may not be the final thing defining you, because pain changes people, sometimes deeply, But pain does not always destroy purpose. Sometimes, against every expectation, purpose survives pain, quietly, patiently, like dream refusing death. And perhaps Joseph leaves every wounded person with one final haunting question. What if the thing that almost broke you is also the thing teaching you how to become someone capable of helping others survive? Because suffering may wound identity, but sometimes it also reveals what pain could never fully take away.